Okay, we're in Parsha Shemini, and I'm reading from the Zera Shimshon, and we're in Drush Chet. And the Zera Shimshon begins to address the topic of the Jewish people, the other nations, truth, and the world to come. And he starts out by quoting in Perek Yud Aleph, um, chapter 11 of Vayikra, verses 44 and 45, and it says, Pasuk ki ani Hashem hama'ale eschem me'eretz Mitzrayim. The end of our parsha in chapter 11, verse 44 and 45 states, "You shall not make your souls impure through eating any creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For I am Hashem who brought you up from the land of Egypt." And then it says, Usmichle, and adjacent to it, in the beginning of the next parsha, it says, Isha ki tatzriya, when a woman conceives and gives birth. And it says, Uvayom hashmini yimol, on the 8th day he shall be circumcised. You can read that in Parsha Tatzriya, chapter 12, verse 2 and 3. And it says, Chazal expound, and he says here, Bayom afilu beshabbat. The words on the 8th day, as implying that a baby boy's circumcision may be performed on the 8th day of its Shabbos. And this is quoted from the Gemara in Shabbat 132a. And it says, Hishu, it says, the commentators ask, Lama chasav khan mitzvat mila. Why is the mitzvah of circumcision written here immediately following the prohibition to eat creeping creatures? And it says, Uvayom afilu beshabbat gam kein chasha. Furthermore, there is a difficulty with the exposition on the 8th day, even on Shabbos. It says, for why does the Torah write this why does the Torah write this permit to circumcise on Shabbos specifically here? It says it should have written it above, basically in Parsha Lech Lecha, when in Bereshit 17, verses 11 to 14, where we see circumcision happening there. Why does it wait all the way to Vayikra to begin to hint to us, to tell us that the mitzvah of circumcision can even override Shabbos? So what is the connection between the prohibition against creeping creatures, the laws of a woman who conceives, and the law of circumcision, because of which the Torah places them adjacent to one another? So these are the questions from the Zera Shimshon. And he carries on, he introduces his approach by examining another verse in the Tanakh, where it says, Bema she'amar hachasuv, with regard to the verse in which Hashem says to the Jewish people, it says, I have planted you from a choice vine, entirely of truthful seed, in Yirmiyah 2, chapter 2, verse 21. Chasha, there's a difficulty. Mahuze hakinui shel zara emes. First, what is the meaning of the expression truthful seed? Hashem should have referred to the Jewish people as holy seed or pure seed. And what is the meaning of truthful seed? Also, what is the reason for saying entirely of truthful seed? Would it have occurred to us that the nation Israel is only from partially truthful seed? And so these are questions, and the Zera Shimshon is trying to bring up something deeper as we go on. And he quotes the Ha'inyan Yaakov. It says, who actually writes in the 5th chapter of Bava Metzia 61b, that the reason for the Torah's prohibition against eating abominable creatures and creeping things is so that there should be a perceptible distinction between the Jewish people and the other nations. Hashem therefore said that the Jewish people's abstention from eating creeping things would have been sufficient reason to redeem them, as it is the conduct that sets them apart from other nations of the world. So the Zera Shimshon says the reason why Jewish people are different from the nations is because they do not eat the non-kosher animals, the creeping things, and these and abominable creatures. That is the main reason, which is um, something I never even thought about before, because I thought usually we eat kosher because it helps remove a blockage between us and Hashem spiritually and these things. But on a much simpler, more simple answer, it's to just distinguish us differently from the nations. And the Zera Shimshon, he begins to question this as well. He says, Vikashe. And now this is difficult to understand. Zemenale. From where does Inyun Yaakov know this idea that it is specifically the law about refraining from eating abominable creatures and creeping things that distinguishes the Jewish people from other nations? Why are we not distinguished from them through all the mitzvot? The mitzvot we do? Why is it specifically about this? And he says, Veyesh Lomar, we may explain that there is a specific distinction caused by the prohibition against abominable creatures and creeping things, which is not present in other mitzvot. And Zera Shimshoni elaborates and he says, the sages say in the 9th chapter of Shabbos 86a, a woman who discharges semen from her body up to the 3rd day after relations is Tame. And Rashi explains she is Tame because the 3rd day after relations the semen has not yet spoiled, and it is still fit to take hold in the woman's womb and produce a child. Thus it is considered semen, as it is capable of fertilization and therefore contaminates a woman who discharges it from her body. That's the end quote from Rashi. And yeah, tatsria literally means seed. Now, a woman doesn't literally emit seed on her own, but this has to do with the couple and interaction with the climax and everything, and with producing a child. And it even says, Rab Papa inquired, what is the law concerning the semen of a Jewish man that was in the womb of a non-Jewish woman? Does it spoil after 3 days like the semen in the womb of a Jewish woman? Or perhaps it remains viable for longer than 3 days? Perhaps this pertains only to a Jew, as the Jewish people are concerned regarding mitzvot, so their bodies are heated, and that causes the semen to spoil after 3 days. In the case of non-Jewish people, however, who are not worried about mitzvot, perhaps it is not so. Alternatively, perhaps since non-Jewish people eat abominable creatures and creeping things, their bodies are also heated. Ad Khan, and the quote of the Gemara ends here. We see from the Gemara that the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people are perhaps similar with regard to the matter of their bodies being heated, except that in the case of the Jewish people, it's because they observe Torah, and in the case of the nations, it would be due to eating abominable creatures. Accordingly, it emerges that there is a great difference between the Jewish people and the nations. For if the non-Jewish people would not eat abominable creatures, their bodies would certainly not become heated. And even now, they do eat them. It is not certain that their bodies become heated. So, as the question of the Gemara actually remained unresolved. Now, going on, Zer Shimshoni says, however, with regard to the Jewish people, it is clear that to all their bodies are certainly heated due to the Torah and the mitzvot that they observe. In this sense, the Jewish people are distinguishable from other nations, as their bodies are always heated, whereas the bodies of non-Jewish people are not. If the Jewish people would also eat abominable creatures, then their bodies would be heated. There would not be any obvious distinction between the Jewish people and the non-Jewish people, for people would perhaps say that Jewish bodies are heated only on account of the abominable creatures. So thus, Iyun Yaakov was correct in saying that the purpose of the prohibition against abominable and creeping creatures is in order that there be clear distinction between the Jewish people and other nations. And what is the connection with entirely truthful seed, as we said earlier? It says, it is for this reason that the Torah places the passages of when a woman conceives adjacent to the prohibition of eating abominable creatures rather than conceives. The most literal translation of the term tatzriah is discharges seed. Thus, it may be interpreted as referring to the semen that a woman discharges after relations. In other words, the Torah wishes to express the significance of the prohibition against eating abominable creatures and therefore follows it by alluding to the viability of semen in a woman's body. And this is also the reason the verse refers to the Jewish people as truthful seed. For it is through their seed, meaning that through the fact their semen spoils after 3 days due to their heated bodies, that they are distinguishable as a people who observe Torah, which is called the Torah of truth. And this is also why it says they are entirely of truthful seed. For the whole distinction is realized only because of the entirety of the Jewish people are worried about their observance of mitzvot. And that is when their bodies are heated on account of Torah, which is absolute truth. And now, going further, that in the future times, the sages say abominable creatures will become permissible, meaning, for in this world, there is need to draw a distinction between the Jewish people and the other nations, as the Jewish people are under the sovereignty of HaKodesh Baruch Hu, whereas the non-Jewish people are under the domination of the heavenly ministers. And this is indicated by a verse here: "You shall not make your souls impure from above, impure through eating any creeping creature that creeps on the earth. For I am Hashem who brought you up from the land of Egypt," which is preceded by the verse, "For I am holy, your God, and you shall sanctify yourself, and you shall become holy, for I am holy," back in verse 44 here. And by placing these verses alongside each other, the Torah indicates that the prohibition against eating creatures applies only as long as it was necessary to identify the Jewish people as Hashem's people. In the future times, however, the heavenly ministers of the other nations will be abolished, and all the nations will be of one language in serving Hashem. And Hashem will be king over the entire land, and everybody will be servants of Hashem. Then all abominable creatures will become permissible for all. And what does this mean? Well, it's much deeper. There's actually a change in the energy, the atmosphere, everything. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be a utopia. So it's something that we totally can't grasp yet. But we gain further insight of why the Jewish people are called truthful seed. Accordingly, we may suggest that the Jewish people are called truthful seed in the sense that they are set apart from the nations who are untruthful seed. And this comes from the prohibition of eating against abominable creatures. It says, as indicated, "For I am Hashem who brings you up from the land of Egypt." In contrast to the nations who are under the domination of heavenly ministers, the Jewish people are under the true sovereignty of Hashem. And this is why we are the true seed. Also, creeping creatures are forbidden only in this world because it's a world of falsehood. And when Shaul raised Shmuel from the grave through a sorceress in 1 Shmuel chapter 28 verse 7, Shmuel said, "When I was with you during my lifetime, I was in a world of falsehood, but now I am in a world of truth." We see that this world is a world of falsehood. Accordingly, creeping creatures are prohibited only in this world because the nations are under the rule of heavenly ministers, which renders this world a world of falsehood to a degree. And it is therefore necessary to separate between the Jewish people and the other nations. But in the world to come, everyone will be under the sovereignty of HaKodesh Baruch Hu, and the abominable creatures will be permitted, and there will be no longer a distinction between the Jewish people and the other nations. And this is why the Jewish people are called the truthful seed, as they are under the sovereignty of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and with whom regard it is written, Hashem, God is true, in Yirmiyah chapter 10, verse 10. And so we see that since the Jewish people are the truthful seed, they are therefore called by the name Yaakov. For Yaakov, his attribute is truth, as it's stated in Micah 7:20. Grant truth to Yaakov. And why indeed was the attribute of truth given to Yaakov? For he sold his rights in this world to Esau in exchange for Esau's portion in the world to come. And that is the world of truth, while this world represents falsehood. And for this reason, those who observe Shabbat are given specifically Yaakov's heritage. As it's stated, if you restrain your foot because it's Shabbos, then you will delight in Hashem. I will provide you heritage of Yaakov, your forefather. And this is quoted in Yeshayah 58, verses 13 to 14. And the verse specifies that those who observe Shabbos will be rewarded with the heritage of Yaakov, because of Yaakov's association with truth and the world to come. For the concept of truth is essential to Shabbos. And Shabbos is in the passage of creation. The verse concludes in Bereshit chapter 2, verse 3. It says, because it says here, because Shabbos, he abstained from all his work which God created to make. In chapter 2, verse 3, it says, Bara Elokim la'asot. And the last three letters of these three words is Aleph Mem Tav, Emet, which is truth. And the Shabbat represents the truth in the same manner as Yaakov. Moreover, Shabbos alludes to the day that is entirely Shabbos. And that is the world to come, which is also called the world of truth. And so there's another idea to explain this, what the Zera Shimshon is trying to bring out here, with the idea that pertains to produce purchased from an Am Haaretz, an unlearned person. The Maaser status of such produce is the subject of halakhic uncertainty, as the seller is not trusted to say that he tithed it. The reason that the sages say in the 4th chapter of Demai in the Mishnah, when an unlearned person testifies on Shabbos that his produce has been tithed, one may rely on his word, as the fear of Shabbos is upon the unlearned people. They are scared to sin by lying on Shabbos more than during the week. And in the commentary, our Avadia Mi Bartenera, it says here, now this is difficult. We see with our eyes that unlearned people commit other sins on Shabbos. So why is it certain that he would not lie? And furthermore, the sages say that an Am Haaretz cannot be pious, so it's difficult to say that they are free of sin of Shabbos. Rather, since the concept of truth is essential to Shabbat, as we have explained, therefore the merit of Shabbos protects them and enables them to be careful in this particular matter, which is linked to the entire meaning of Shabbat. Now, in the Hebrew Gospels, in the Dalich, in the Gospels here, in the book of Matthew, Yeshua, he gives a parable of a wedding feast, and it's in Matthew 22, and verses 1 all the way through 14. And he talks about how there was guests invited to the wedding feast. Some, they didn't want to come, so we went and invited other guests to bring them in. But there was this one person who kind of snuck in, and he wasn't dressed appropriately. He wasn't dressed in wedding clothes. And in verse 12 of this chapter, it says, he said to him, "My friend, why did you come here without wedding clothes?" But he was speechless. And this is called the world of truth, where even A Rasha cannot lie. He can only tell the truth. And this is why he was speechless. And so, as I'm just reading through the Zera Shimshon, that reminded me of that passage there. Also, what about Yaakov? It's Yaakov is esoterically associated with the letter Vav of the divine name. The four letters which correspond to the four legs of the divine chariot. Now, Yalkut Raveni writes in Parsha Tatzriah in the name of Sefer Hapliah. This is the adaptation of his words. It's stated, on the eighth day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Yimol. The term Yimol is comprised of three letters, Yud, Mem, and Lamed. So I'm just going to show you here, because this is actually amazing here. This word Yimol. It's comprised of three letters, Yud, Mem, and Lamed, and that they're pronounced, and a fourth, Vav. So we see there's a Vav here, but only the Yud, Mem, and Lamed are actually pronounced. The Vav is not pronounced, and which we may expound focusing on the letter Vav, the numerical gematria of the letter starting from Aleph, the first letter, until and including the letter Vav amount to 21. How is this so? This is a gematria that works like this. So Aleph would be 1, Bet is 2. You add them together, you get 3 plus Dalet 4. So then you got 1, 2, 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, which is the Vav, equals 21. This is what the Zera Shimshon is saying. So this Vav multiplied equals 21. Also, it's the same gematria as Echie. The 21 is multiplied, and when you multiply it twice, Echie, 21 times 21 equals 441, which is the numerical value of Emet, truth. So you got Aleph equals 1, Mem equals 40, and the Tav 441. And accordingly, this is the meaning of the verse, give truth to Yaakov, since the name Ehiyeh is numerically related to the letter Vav, and it's associated with Yaakov, and since the very name is the numeric root of Emet, we may say that Yaakov is associated with Emes. So we see like Yaakov's name in certain times of the Torah is spelt with a Vav and without a Vav. And this is the hint of the Vav with Yaakov's name. And so we see, as for three letters that are pronounced, the Yud, Mem, and Lamed, he says, relates Hashem's great wonders. In the term Aleph in expanded form, when you spell Aleph, it would be spelled Aleph, Lamed, Fe. And then you have the Mem spelled out in full as Mem, Mem. And then the Tav you would spell Tav, Yud, Vav. And so he says the letter Lamed in the letter Aleph, the letter Mem in Mem, and the letter Yud in the word Tav, you remove those letters and it spells Yimul for circumcision, which immediately follow the letters of Emet. So you have Aleph, Mem, Tav. And the letters that remain after the Aleph, Mem, and Tav of Emet, the Yud, Mem, and Lamed, Yimul, are removed and are Pei and Vav. Now this gematria of the word Mila, circumcision, and furthermore the number of all the letters in the expanded form of Emes, Hem Shemona, is 8. You literally have 8 letters here, and it refers to the circumcision specifically performed on the 8th day, which is numerically associated with the concept of truth, which is associated with Yaakov. And now this verse is alluded, on the 8th day of the flesh, his foreskin shall be circumcised. And thus, since The circumcision is associated with the divine name Ehyeh as it extends into the term Emet, which is the attribute of Yaakov. Therefore, the mitzvah of circumcision on the 8th day overrides Shabbos, as we explained. And so he goes on to say, and this is why Yaakov was born circumcised. You see, the sages say this, but they're really not getting this out of nowhere. We can see this whole thing even building a remez, a hint to all of this here, which is amazing. And that Yaakov is associated with the truth, the world to come, Shabbos, and even circumcision. And the underlying idea of Shabbos are all one. Circumcision is associated with truth, which is the attribute of Yaakov because it alluded to the letters that expanded of the form of emes. So we see all of this together, that it's to remain with the so all the letters, 8 letters, hint to circumcision in Emet, and we see that Shabbos is connected and the name of Yaakov, and this is why Israel is actually called the truthful seed. And we see here that this is a distinction. Not only is the keeping away from unkosher creatures and abominable things we don't eat, that this separates us from the nations, but also so does Shabbat, so does some circumcision, and it's all tied together. This is the big hint that Zera Shimshon is bringing about, all from this, that they're all tied together, all tied in truth, and that's what we represent. We represent the truth, and this is why we are separated and distinguished from the nations.